Hello, and welcome to Week 4 of NMP 600 Foundations of Nonprofit Management. I know it seems impossible, but this is Week 4, which means we are at the mid-semester point in our class. I hope that you all are doing well. I was delighted to speak with so many of you in our phone conversations, and I know that many of you have had phone conversations with your advisor, Professor Grime. And I know that I speak for him when I say that it's great to be in touch with all of you. And I want to reinforce the message that please be in touch with us if you have questions or concerns about how you're doing or what is expected of you in the program. So thanks once again for making those phone calls and staying in touch with us. Week 4. This week, our assignment, which I'll be discussing a little later, is the midterm exam. That's the big assignment for this week. And the topic for our readings and our discussions this week will be managing people and the role of volunteers. So I thought we would start it off once again with a cartoon just to sort of get us on a humorous note to start with. As you can see if you read the cartoon, this is an expression of what we don't want an effective our volunteer program to be. In other words, using volunteers to perform those menial tasks, the tasks that nobody else wants to do, so we'll give them to volunteers. That's not a way to engage people in meaningful ways within your organization, which is not to say that you can't ask volunteers to help you do mailings, but to make sure that those tasks are scattered in amongst other tasks which the volunteers will find meaningful and will connect them to the organization. Let's talk a little bit about volunteerism and what volunteer work is. It's a formal arrangement with the organization. It is in the public sector, and it's unpaid. Volunteer work is not just unpaid labor. It is unpaid labor that is appropriately motivated. So therefore, volunteers can reap benefits so long as they're not the primary reason for doing the work. To be very scientific about it, the concept must be internally consistent and clearly indicate what it is and what it is not. And you can see here that the context is it all depends on the social context in which the work is performed. It does not include membership in voluntary associations or informal helping, such as babysitting, for example. Although more often studied separately, volunteering does include social activism. And we end with the final quote: volunteer work includes not only the unpaid provision of services directly to others in need, but also political activism and community representation on boards of various agencies. Let's take a quick look at some statistics relating to volunteering in America, and you can see that the source is from volunteeringinamerica.gov. Nationally, in 2011, 26.8% of all residents volunteered. 7.85 billion total volunteer hours were logged in 2011. 65.1% do favors for their neighbors. 89.5% of those who volunteer eat dinner with their families a few times or more a week. And 49.1% discuss politics a few times a month or more. That's just a sort of a snapshot picture of the volunteer in 2011. In Massachusetts, specifically in 2011, 25.8% of residents volunteered, ranking them 36th among the 50 states and Washington, D.C. 25.8% volunteer hours per resident. 69.9% do favors for their neighbors, which is a little higher, slightly higher than the national average. 88.1% eat dinner with their family a few times a week or more. 54.1% discuss politics a few times a month or more. Again, slightly higher than the national average. 1.38 million volunteers in Massachusetts in 2011. 137.5 million hours of service and 3 billion of service contributed. So why is volunteerism so important, and why do we spend time studying it? Well, first and foremost, volunteers are crucial to the nonprofit's ability to achieve their missions. And the volunteers are a key differentiator of the nonprofit sector. You don't find volunteers in the for-profit sector or in the government sector. It is a key for nonprofit organizations is to match individuals' motives to the volunteering situation. And that holds through the initial recruitment, retention, and the commitment to sustained service. And finally, there is this whole question surrounding the public policy of mandating volunteering. Can volunteering be encouraged, pressured, or even mandatory? Those are some of the public policy implications. So let's take a closer look at the essential components of an effective volunteer program, remembering that the volunteer efforts are really make this element unique to the nonprofit sector. One of the most distinctive features of the nonprofit sector is its ability, in point of fact, to harness the productive labor of literally millions of citizens in service to organizational goals without benefit of remuneration. And as we've discussed earlier, nearly half of the U.S. adults provide volunteer services, the monetary value of which is over $200 billion. However, harnessing this power comes at a price. The organization must establish a management structure to deal with volunteers. They must recruit them, screen them, train them, supervise, motivate, evaluate, and finally recognize those volunteers to assess the efficacy of their placement for themselves as well as for the organization. According to Brudny, the essential components of a volunteer program are as follows. You see the first four of them on the screen. The first and most important really is the purpose for enlisting volunteer assistance. What is the rationale for enlisting volunteers? Is it to save cost? Is it to extend the agency resources, or both of these reasons in order to operate more cost effectively? Are there other purposes, such as strengthening a community connection, increasing public awareness, increasing access to programs, acquiring needed skills that the organization doesn't have the funding to hire, or finally, to raise funds? Involving staff in the development of volunteer program design is really important because volunteer involvement can dramatically change the workplace. So therefore, staff members have a stake in determining where, when, and how volunteers will be used to attain agency goals. This can be accomplished by establishing a planning committee to address qualifications and the management of volunteers, and to establish policies related to their performance, such as attendance, benefits, grievance procedures, confidentiality, code of conduct, etc. Ultimately, volunteers should be subject to the same requirements and responsibilities as paid staff. A plan to integrate volunteers into the operation. Unstructured ad hoc programs will deteriorate and disappear over time. Outsourcing recruitment, training, or coordination can be a deterrent to developing the necessary capacity in-house. Overall centralized models in which the activities of volunteers across the organization tend to work more effectively than decentralized models, which allow different departments to coordinate their own volunteers, although this model can work well in pilot programs or startups. In the centralized model, the volunteer office provides guidelines, technical assistance, screening, training, and the administration of volunteer activity, and it is able to place volunteers in the most suitable positions. And finally, on this slide, establishing positions of program leadership. Empowered volunteers are more connected to the organization and more loyal. Access to the decision-making process helps motivate volunteers just as it does paid employees. The volunteer program must be linked to management at the highest possible level. Having a paid volunteer coordinator or a director of volunteer services responsible for the functioning of the program sends a powerful message about the importance of volunteers to the organization. It is also a means of educating the employees about the value and utilization of those volunteers. A strong director of volunteer services acts as a trainer, resource, and advocate for the needs of volunteers within the organization. And moving on to the final 4 components, job descriptions for volunteers. There is little difference in the types of jobs that can or should be paid versus those that can be provided by volunteers having the appropriate skills. There are typically differences in the scope of these jobs, as volunteers usually have less time to give to the organization than paid employees. By the same token, certain jobs require technical skills or a comfort level that would not lend themselves well to volunteers. Otherwise, the basic administrative approach to building a volunteer job description is the same. A job title and purpose, benefits, qualifications, time commitment, start date, job responsibilities, reporting relationships, all of these. The volunteer candidates should be screened and interviewed to ensure an appropriate fit and undergo the same orientation as paid employees. Meeting the needs of volunteers. Volunteers are motivated by a variety of factors, most frequently the desire to do something useful to help others or help other people. Another strong motivator to volunteerism is the desire to give something back for services or attention that the volunteer himself or herself has received earlier. In addition to these altruistic reasons, there are additional motivations having to do with the environment in which the volunteer will function. From this perspective, it can be important for volunteer positions to be enjoyable and interesting, provides a learning benefit, or fosters personal growth. Oftentimes, a volunteer opportunity will provide a training opportunity or a career benefit, or reinforce social relationships. Like paid employees, it is important for volunteers to experience a connection between their efforts and the organization's goals. Placing volunteers, and paid staff for that matter, in positions where they can put their strongest motivations and best skills to work always produces the best results. Managing volunteers. Managing volunteers is slightly different than managing paid staff in that volunteers demand greater flexibility, selectivity in assignments, and autonomy over their work than paid employees. But some believe that the management by partnership model, rather than a command and control model, when used with volunteers, is becoming a commonly held best practice with paid employees as well. And finally, evaluating and recognizing those volunteer efforts. Despite the potential PR pitfalls, evaluation of volunteers contributes to their motivation and performance and provides an opportunity to redirect efforts and remedy mistakes. It also reinforces the value of volunteer labor and shows the volunteer that their time has not been wasted. It should be a two-way process in which volunteers can express how well the position is meeting their needs as well as a volunteer. Recognition is critical, and often that recognition takes the form of an offer for paid employment. Other types of recognition includes awards, social events, media coverage, appearances in publications, and above all, positive references. It is also important to evaluate the volunteer program to see if it is contributing as expected to the organization's needs. The impact can be measured in a number of ways, including calculation of the number of volunteer hours donated to the organization and an estimate of its market value in terms of salaries. These often do not take into account the full costs of operating a volunteer program. In addition, the organization should assess the value of the volunteers to the mission and strategic plan, the impact of their work on clients, their contribution to greater community understanding and awareness, and similar intangible benefits. Moreover, it can be valuable to conduct a process evaluation to measure volunteer and employee satisfaction within the program. And now let's turn to those paid employees, your workforce, and let's talk a little bit about workforce dynamics. In the chapter by Cornelius and Corvington entitled Nonprofit Workforce Dynamics, which you will find in the Salmon text, the authors examine some perceptions and often misperceptions about the nonprofit workforce, including lack of career path, low pay, inadequate compensation, and a culture of martyrdom, among others. I'd like you to think very carefully about to what extent you think that these stereotypes are still valid. If you think they're not, how does this affect the task and work of the nonprofit manager, especially as it relates to the management of people? Overturning stereotypes. To be fair, more nonprofits than ever before have adopted these and other contemporary management practices, turning over many of the old stereotypes about the nonprofit environment as backward, stodgy, and poorly supported, while at the same time more altruistic and people-focused. In fact, many nonprofits now have sophisticated management structures and are attentive to the financial bottom line and other outcomes. At the same time, the image of the nonprofit workforce is changing from that of a contingent of poorly compensated but dedicated do-gooders unable to succeed in the larger business environment. In fact, the nonprofit workforce is as highly trained and qualified to do comparable work and are required to show the same level of professionalism as their for-profit peers. Nonprofit hiring practices. Nonprofits are subject to the same hiring requirements as for-profit businesses, including laws concerning discrimination, privacy, labor relations, and payroll taxes. They must also pay attention to such issues as diversity and fair hiring practices, as well as adhere to legal and ethical standards when interviewing, evaluating, or terminating employees. At the same time, nonprofits have an interest in selecting employees who fit with the unique culture, values, and mores of the organization, those who will be most inclined to stay with the organization. The tension between bringing in new perspectives and choosing people who are an easier fit is faced as much by nonprofit organizations as by for-profit organizations. In conclusion, the nonprofit workplace is a dynamic, evolving environment subject to many of the same forces as the for-profit sector, but it also has some unique level of citizen participation in the form of board and volunteer involvement that allow nonprofit organizations to connect with their communities in meaningful ways. As the distinctions between the sectors continues to blur, and as the trends and predicted workforce changes begin to take hold, it will be interesting to see if some of this unique flavor is lost and what the field will do to preserve it. Let's talk a little bit about staff development. Attracting motivated employees is easy for nonprofits. Keeping them is hard. Nonprofits tend to offer the kind of meaningful work that so many people are seeking today. The trick is channeling employee energies into the accomplishment of the organization's mission without overwhelming them or burning them out. The key to achieving this goal is to tap into the primary sources of employee motivation and support these needs with appropriate HR practices. People in the field frequently comment that low pay scales and short career ladders are the primary cause of the high turnover in the field. But as Hertzberg has shown, achieving results is the primary motivation for most workers. When employees fail to get that kind of satisfaction from their work, pay and working conditions can become an added source of dissatisfaction that prompts them to leave. In order to attract talent and improve retention, it's important to look first at the nature of nonprofit jobs and how they contribute to more satisfying, productive careers. And then at how nonprofit employees can be better equipped to achieve the organization's goals. Drucker suggests that organizations need to focus on hiring people for what they can do instead of what they can't do. Some other best practices gleaned from various corporate and nonprofit case studies include: structure jobs to achieve and see results. This is difficult when the sought-after outcomes are intangible and take a long time to accomplish. Setting interim goals and finding ways to demonstrate impact can be used to show an employee that his or her work is leading somewhere. Focus on employee strengths. Then make really stringent demands and make sure there are processes in place so that employee performance gets reviewed on a regular basis and in a meaningful way. Drucker reminds us to not be afraid to let the non-performers go. He says, and I quote, "If they try, they deserve a second chance. If they don't try, make sure they leave." End quote. Challenge your employees. Providing new opportunities for growth and accomplishment are particularly important when there are limited opportunities for promotion. Reward attitude as well as outcome. Employers are increasingly emphasizing attitude as a primary aspect of performance. Not just get results, but how did you get results? And finally, track the workforce. Keep track of turnover, the reasons for it, and other issues such as the diversity of the workforce in order to understand what is going on in the work environment. So let's turn our attention to specifically staff development. The first item is to invest in infrastructure. Information systems, budget, financial reporting, professional HR are all critical ways to support the ability of a staff to do their jobs. Failure to invest in these items in the name of cost control can be very self-defeating for nonprofits. Seek new skills to match new needs. As organizations grow and change, it is important to recruit staff with the business and management skills to help the organization succeed. Recognize and value results. Reinforce the value of performance by reinforcing results with specific rewards such as recognition and raises. Provide adequate compensation and rewards. While financial rewards are not the primary motivating factors, lack of financial stability can undermine staff retention. While nonprofits may not be able to match private sector salaries, some people believe that many nonprofits may be more unwilling than unable to pay their people better. That's according to the Let's article that you read. As nonprofits have become more competitive, the use of incentive-based pay has risen. These include increased pay for skill development, gain-sharing programs, and bonuses, all designed to reward excellence. Develop an employee evaluation policy tool and use it. According to Brinkerhoff, the evaluation process should be two-way, including a written and oral component. Should be used to set and evaluate goals for managers and their employees. Should not contain surprises. Should provide a context for any numerical ratings. Should contain evaluative criteria that are mission-based and important to the organization as well as the individual job that is being evaluated. And finally, separate evaluation from compensation in terms of timing. Make the evaluation system an ongoing two-way process and separate out the discussion about money from evaluation of the work effort. So I'm curious, what reactions did you have to this week's readings by Drucker? What seemed to resonate or strike you as especially significant, and why? What is the staff director's role in the voluntary organization? On one end of the spectrum, the director is viewed as, quote, the expert who acts principally in an advisory capacity to the interested volunteers, end quote, such as a fundraising consultant. At the other extreme, the staff person is seen as, quote, simply the individual who carries out the clerical details of the agency's function, end quote. In vibrant voluntary organizations, the role falls somewhere in the middle. Given the magnitude and importance of the nonprofit's work, the staff leader must be an experienced professional with expertise in a variety of management areas, as well as the agent for accomplishing routine business matters on behalf of the board and volunteers. Since no one director can be an expert in every aspect of nonprofit management, good executives draw on the expertise of board members, community members, and outside consultants. Board members can also bring experts to the table to help solve significant, specific problems. The executive director is also a basic communications link between the board, the staff, and the community, and must also be a leader, a motivator, and visionary to help keep people engaged with the organization's goals. The CEO should, quote, paint the big picture, end quote, articulate key questions, and guide a collaborative effort to formulate answers with the board. According to the Drucker article, the effective nonprofit executive manager manages his or her people for performance, but always with compassion. As Drucker says, people work in nonprofits because they believe in the cause. They owe performance, and the executive owes them compassion, end quote. In addition, Drucker cautions executives to take the responsibility of selecting people very carefully and not depend solely on one's instincts and or perceptions about people. Rather than focusing on a candidate's characteristics, Drucker advises the nonprofit executive to look at what the person has actually done in his or her last few assignments and to focus on actual strengths by asking, what has this person shown that they can do in their last 3 assignments? When all is said and done, the effective nonprofit executive helps to define reality for his or her employees and gives them the tools that they need to do their jobs. As Drucker says, quote, an executive's first responsibility is to enable people who want to do the job, who are paid for doing the job, who supposedly have the skills to do the job, be able to do the job, end quote. An important part of this involves getting rid of the organizational roadblocks that limit an individual's personal effectiveness. Drucker also emphasizes the importance of maintaining good two-way communication with staff, board members, donors, and all other constituencies by encouraging people to ask questions and by setting a tone that encourages people to bring their problems out in the open where they can be dealt with. So, here we are in our fourth week, mid-semester, and I would like you to think about what your mid-semester highs and lows have been. One of the discussion forum questions this week actually will focus on this question. In a few paragraphs or words, please describe your high and low points of the course so far. What has been surprising, for example? Were you disappointed by anything? And how has your understanding of the nonprofit sector changed or not changed? Not only will this be a chance for you to reflect on what we've done so far in these first 4 weeks, but also an opportunity for me to identify any areas that might need strengthening as we move forward. And finally, let's look ahead at the work for week 4 and then just a quick peek into week 5. Looking ahead into week 4, your major assignment for this week is your midterm, which is a series of short essays based on case studies. You'll find those instructions in the week 4 module, and it will be due on Sunday night by midnight. Looking ahead to and also the discussion forums this week. Looking ahead to week 5, will be Thanksgiving week. There will be discussion forums, but because it is Thanksgiving week, I'm going to extend the final deadline for those discussion forums to Saturday night at midnight. That'll give you one more day to get your postings in. There will also be a lighter assignment that week, just to allow us to catch our breath after all the furious work of the first 4 weeks. And also because of the Thanksgiving holiday, I didn't want to give you a big assignment when you probably have family and want to spend some time. So the assignment on week 5 will be a lighter assignment, and it will be a structured way for you to familiarize yourself with the final requirements of the NMP SFP program, most specifically the e-portfolio, the creation of the e-portfolio, and the capstone research project. Just want to make sure moving forward into the rest of the program that you understand not only the gravity of those assignments, those final assignments, but also structurally how you can begin now, even now, to prepare for those final assignments. So that's it. I'm sorry that my remarks have taken a little longer this week. I apologize for that. Once again, it was a delight to talk to so many of you on the phone. Please call with questions if you have them, or send me an email. And I'll see you in the discussion forums. Thanks so much.